So, we have Genesis chapter 11 today, and it's the last genealogy until Genesis 47. So, I knew how many genealogies were in the opening part of Genesis, but it never struck me before until teaching through them, both how much is in the genealogies and how there's one every couple chapters. To start with a review of Genesis 9 and 10, in the end of Genesis 9, Ham dishonors Noah while Shem and Japheth honor him. And so Noah blesses Shem and Japheth and curses Ham's descendants through Canaan. And the curse seems to be regarding authority, that none of those cultures, even though Canaan's descendants would settle in several different parts of the world, none of those cultures would have any leadership with their kingdoms and their nations over the rest of the nations of the world. So, that's the end of Genesis 9. Genesis chapter 10 specifically focuses on 70 different names of Noah's sons, grandsons, great-grandsons, and going down a couple more generations. And each of the names that's focused is referencing cities, groups of people, or even nations after the flood. And the last important thing to note is Genesis chapter 11. Most of it is referencing peoples after the Tower of Babel, because you have the phrase repeated 3 times. Like an example would be Genesis chapter 10, verse 5. By these were the isles of the Gentiles divided in their lands, everyone after his tongue, after their families in their nations. So when the Bible says everyone's divided after his tongue, we're talking about after the Tower of Babel when the languages are divided. So it's important to note that Genesis chapter 10 is a summary of the areas and nations of the world, but a lot of it referencing after the Tower of Babel, which we are going to talk about today. So, that's Genesis 9 and 10. Last important thing to reference, by Jewish tradition, as well as by implication from some of the language here, Nimrod himself in the land of Shinar was the king at the time of the Tower of Babel. There is no certainty here. The Bible says that in Peleg's days the earth was divided, and if you count up generations, Peleg is 1 generation after Nimrod. In other words, Nimrod's been living for 1 generation before Peleg. That part fits with time. The land of Shinar is the same land mentioned in this chapter now, chapter 11. And the Bible mentions 6 cities that are part of Nimrod's kingdom, and one of those 6 is Babel. If it was not Nimrod himself who was responsible for direction and part of the Tower of Babel, it was definitely somebody very close to him who was. So, all that to say, Genesis chapter 9 and 10 in some ways set the stage for Genesis 11 and the Tower of Babel. So what are the purposes of Genesis chapter 11? It shows another way of man's rebellion against God with their kingdom and with their objectives for building this city and tower. So we're talking about a kingdom in Shinar. I'll mention where that is shortly, as well as the city and tower built. We see God's response to man's ambition here, because that's really what we're dealing with, the ambition of man to be, I'll say, in a selfish sense, against the Lord and the things of God. We see God's response to that, and we see the genealogy of Abraham here, with a shift of the rest of the book of Genesis to Abraham's family. We are shifting there at the end of Genesis chapter 11. Any questions so far? So go ahead, then. We will start Genesis chapter 11. Do I have a volunteer to read verses 1 through 4? Thank you, Damien. Chapter 11, verses 1 through 4. Slime? Yep. And they said, "Go, Thank you. So, very first part here, Genesis chapter 11 and 1. This is the last part of the Bible or of human history in general, probably until the eternal state. I would expect in the eternal state there is only one language. But this is the last part until then that you have only one language in the whole world. And we see here the people that are referenced as they journeyed from the east. They found a plain in the land of Shinar and they dwelt there. Back a while ago, when covering where Noah's Ark landed in the mountains of Ararat, mentioned the two areas. You have Mount Ararat, which is in Iran, and you have the mountains of Ararat, which are in Turkey. This would lend credence to the fact that the Ark landed in Iran because they're journeying from the east to get to Shinar. Where is Shinar? It goes all the way from the Persian Gulf in what is now Iran, all the way up the plain of the Tigris and Euphrates to the point where the foothills start, which is basically the border between Iran and Iraq. We're a little bit into Iraq when we were talking about the plain of Shinar, but it's a flat area before the foothills start with two very big rivers, the Tigris and Euphrates, meaning a lot of farming is possible even now with irrigation. And back then, almost certainly, the plain of Shinar was not desert. The earth was very likely cooler from what we see. So they decide when they find this plain that they're going to dwell there. Well, it's good for agriculture, and it's also good for their purposes. We find out right afterward that they're interested in building a city and a tower. So, what are they using for this city and tower? We have bricks, and the Bible mentions in this verse slime for mortar. That's talking about asphalt. Talking about asphalt, the same sticky stuff that is used to make asphalt stick together. That's what they were using to stick their bricks together. So they're baking brick. They're making asphalt for mortar. I went and looked up how tall a mud brick building can be, and it actually surprised me. Over 100 feet. The biggest mud brick buildings still standing are in Mali, and they're 700 or 800 years old, and they're over 100 feet tall. You can build pretty big towers out of mud brick. It surprises me because eventually you get to a part where the weight is too heavy, you're smashing the bricks below and they crumble because of the weight of what's above it. But you can make 10-story tall buildings out of mud bricks. They're interested in building both a city and a tower. So we look at verse 4. All of them are agreed in this. They decide it's a good idea to build this city and the tower, whose top may reach into heaven. It's either a reference to the height of the tower or it's a reference to using the tower for astrology. We know immediately that every one of these cultures in this area worshipped the host of heaven. And once again, according to Jewish tradition, Nimrod was responsible for creating the first false religion, whichever false religion was created here is the basis for the false religion of Egypt as well, and the false religion of Canaan with the Baals. All of them come from the same root. They have the same basic structure with different names, similarly to how the Greek and Roman religions are basically the same with different names. The Babylonian, Egyptian, and Canaanite religion with Baal, because Canaanites had more than one false religion. Those three come from the same part. So, it certainly is an impressive tower. It's probably one that's also used for astrology. Referencing again back to Genesis chapter 10, Nimrod is referenced as the mighty hunter before the Lord. And the phrase before the Lord literally means against the face of God. That is, God's face is this way and he's standing this way with his face directly against. It's a phase, I'm not saying that, oh, he was a mighty hunter and God took notice of that, saying a mighty hunter and he was standing basically against the will of God. Well, why is that? We don't know. That would definitely make sense if he's the one inventing false religions. That is very much against the Lord. But we have this city and this tower being built. Remember, even though a lot of these details, they may connect, the details given in the Bible are most important. So we have a city and a tower being built. Why are they building it? To make themselves a name. They're building the city and tower to make themselves famous. So you're talking about only thousands of people at this point, maybe tens of thousands. We're a few generations after the flood, and they're interested in being more famous than all the other people on this earth. And they're also interested in keeping their unity, make us a name lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth. They do not want to be divided, they don't want to be scattered, they want to be together, and they basically want to be the world power. Once again, when we think about this, just building the most impressive architectural feats, that goes a long way towards that, in terms of making yourself famous in a world that's only thousands of people. If they're inventing a false religion with themselves at the center as well, that's, once again, trying to establish themselves as the world power. Yes?
The end of verse 4, where it says, lest we be scattered abroad. Just the way God works, I wonder if that phrase came from preaching, saying, hey, God doesn't. In other words, giving warnings. These people are rejecting it, which is following the scenario you're laying out. That I wonder if that was from something that was spoken, because there had to be some godly people there who were not saying, oh yeah, this is a great idea.
Absolutely. They definitely have a reason, because they're fearing it. They have a reason to be afraid that this is what's going to happen. And we see in Genesis chapter 11, not only does this happen, it was their rebellion that causes God to do this. But all that to mention, it is very possible, as Pastor mentioned, that they had already been warned that to rebel against God will lead to being scattered abroad across the earth, and they were trying to prevent that from happening.
For my understanding, for many years, there's always been another reason God was so infuriated by their pride is they said they wanted to build a tower that reaches up to heaven, and that let us be like the gods. And not even saying God, saying the gods, because they had lost faith with the real God. And so not only were they arrogant, overly prideful, but they wanted to take the equal to God, which was the same thing Satan did.
So, in terms of controlling their own destiny, it's very, very clear they exactly want that from this part. They do not want God controlling them. They want to control their own destiny and their own culture, their own nation. So, whose top may reach unto heaven? No culture. We're talking about a Sumerian culture here, very advanced in terms of their building and such. And the Sumerians had mathematics. It would be very easy to calculate the amount of stuff you need. And even to get as tall as a mountain, you would give up. Whose top may reach into heaven is not saying they're trying to make the tallest tower, like taller than everything else. They are trying to make the greatest tower in this entire part of the world. And it's a plain, it's a flat desert plain. You make a tower that's 100 feet tall, and you're going to see this tower from a couple miles. It's something, in that sense, they are absolutely rebelling against God. In the sense they don't want God controlling them, is very much, they want to have the same power He does. They want to control their own country rather than letting the Lord. And it should be important to mention here, God had commanded Noah and his 3 sons, being fruitful and multiply, and then to spread out and to fill the earth. And by creating a nation directly here in one plane, that may or may not be disobedience directly to God, my mind generally inclines on yes, it is, because God makes them spread out anyway. So, all of that to mention, they're building this very impressive tower, which may or may not be for a false religion. They are doing it very much. They're not trying to make a name for God, they're trying to make a name for themselves, which goes directly into the pride you mentioned, Damien. That's the direct, symptom of human pride, is trying to exalt one's own greatness instead of trying to exalt God's greatness. And brings us to, they're trying to make a name for themselves to not be scattered. So, what's God's response? Yes. Yes.
People had already spread out on
So it is a very, very good question. We will talk about that. So I actually did not look up the word whole earth. I'd assume it's referring to the peoples of the earth rather than the earth itself. As far as how far apart people could have spread by now, we're certainly dealing with spreads into India, possibly into the north of Africa, across the entire Middle East, and probably into the area north of Turkey and what is now Azerbaijan and Georgia. But all that is somewhat speculation. We do know how it affected the other cultures of the world, so that part we'll be getting to at the end. Yes.
Just to go with what you said, because it does say the whole earth was of one language, and the earth itself doesn't speak. So
Yeah.
they would tend to point to the people. So everybody on earth had that same language.
Well, my understanding is, and maybe this is what I've been taught, but I've always thought that we all spoke the same language until after the Tower fell. Because we were all descended from Adam and then consequently from Noah. And so we all spoke the same language called Hebrew. And then after the Tower of Babel, God confused the language. That's what I've always been thinking.
That's extremely clear biblically. It's extremely clear biblically. And we will be referencing that by the end of today.
What we were referring to, Damien, was the word in verse 1, the whole earth, that doesn't mean necessarily everybody had covered the whole earth yet. But everybody who was on earth, no matter where they were, had the same language. So we're saying the same.
So we have verses 5 to 9 then. Do I have a volunteer to read verses 5 through 9? Go ahead, Steve.
The Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the children of men builded. And the Lord said, Behold, the people is one, they all have one language. And this they begin to do. Now nothing will be restrained from them which they have imagined to do. Go to, let us go down in there and confound their language. They may not understand one another's speech. So the Lord scattered them abroad from thence upon the face of all the earth, and they left off to build the city. Therefore is the name called Babel, because the Lord did there confound the language of all the earth. From thence did the Lord scatter them abroad upon all the face of the earth.
Thank you very much. So we have God's response. The Lord came down to see the city and the tower is referencing that he took notice of it. Not that God had to move anywhere. Not that God sees in any sense like we see because he knows everything at all times. But God took notice of this. And we have God speaking about this in verse 6. Whenever God speaks like this and he's speaking to himself in the Bible, it's because he wants us to understand this part. Because God obviously does not need to speak to himself to get anything done. It's for our benefit that he's speaking here. What does he say in verse 6? People is one. That's talking about unity. They're all united. They have one language, so there's no communication difficulties either. They're beginning to do this. And the idea of nothing will be restrained of them which they have imagined to do, is if they're beginning to do this is the first thing they decide to do as one people. What are they going to do in the future? Everything they want to do, they're going to try to accomplish. And so God is going to stop this. How is he going to stop it? In verse 7, let us go down and there confound their language, that they may not understand one another's speech. So he splits languages up here. And not only that, we have verse 8, the Lord scattered them abroad from thence upon the face of all the earth, and they left off to build the city. This is, by the way, this verse here is one of the strongest arguments for the creationist as opposed to against the evolutionist idea of societies. Because what does the evolutionist believe? Somewhere, and there's a few different choices depending on which part of evolution you would listen to, humans first evolved. And they spread out from here, and the languages slowly diverged, and the people slowly spread out and such. And you get problems. One of the problems is, like, there are cultures like the Eskimos and the Inuits, where the people who have done this actually have traced their migrations across through Mongolia, through Russia, into America, and into Canada. Those cultures work perfectly. What about the Aztecs and the Incas? that, according to evolutionists, would have to go all the way through all of that, then all the way south through a lot of very, very impassable terrain in Central America. It's one spot between Nicaragua and Panama and into Colombia still does not have roads connecting it because the terrain is so difficult. You go all the way through all of that, all the way south through South America, and none of that migration can be traced. Why? Because it never happened. God moved the people that became the Aztecs, the Incas, the Mayans, and a couple others just straight over to Americas. And so they've grown up here. Also, you have the same thing, the Polynesians in certain Pacific islands. You can island hop a lot. If you were on one of these islands, you can sail around that island and you'll see other islands and figure out which directions to go. But in terms of like, how did somebody find the Hawaiian Islands in the first place? Everybody who tried that, you're not hitting those islands. You're going to get lost, sunk, whatever. So, affects island nations, same way. God moved people there that became the people of these island nations. There's a couple very, very strong examples where you have peoples living on one island that have no cultural similarities or language similarities to any of the people around them. What happened? Well, it's like they were teleported there. You have the example too. There are Babylonian cultures found in the Congo in Africa. They're ruins. They had no reason to go down there. As far as we know, they never did. What's that from? Areas of just how we find evidence of some people's migrations very clearly, and the rest of the people, it's like they just teleported. What happened? God actually scattered the people abroad upon the face of the earth. We know from the previous chapter it's by families. God did this by families, with each family moved to the area that would later become their nations of the 70 mentioned in Genesis. My general part, we do not know, is that only some of them were moved, not all of them. But there are a lot of nations that appear, like for instance, Ethiopia. Ethiopia is mentioned in the previous chapter. How did you get to Ethiopia? You have to basically cross the Sahara Desert. Now maybe it was more hospitable back then, in fact very likely it was. But how many people are going to follow the Nile all the way down to its source? Like, okay, let's cross these mountains to the east, some of the most inclement terrain in Africa, to get to Ethiopia. Well, what happened? More likely they were just moved to the area that is now Ethiopia. A lot of this, and I could keep going and going if I wanted, but a lot of the missing migratory paths of people fits directly with God moved them.
When you say they're as if they were transported, you're not saying necessarily that God just picked them up. Is that what you're implying?
I think that's extremely clear with people like the Aztecs, the Incas, the Polynesians and such. They didn't randomly travel to the areas that they now live in. Or like I mentioned, the couple disconnected island peoples with no culture and language similarities. An example would be the Sentinelese in India.
A thought.
Yes.
You know, when America, the United States, there were people that God put upon their heart. Let's go west. Let's just go. And no, I'm talking about heading west. Back.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah, I'm talking about our nation. That I'm wondering at times when God moved them, if somebody just said, "Let's go," you know, and family groups of maybe 150, 200, 1,000. Let's just go. We're not stopping anywhere. We're just going, and they just headed out either by boat or across land because God put in their heart, "I'm an adventurer," you know, and that type of thing. That could be another way that God just. And I understand if you had that many people, there'd be people dropping off, and
Yeah.
you know there would be a line. Okay, they obviously traveled this way because this is here, this is here. This is here.
And that's areas, a lot of the cultures of the world, the migration is trackable, such as I gave the example of the Inuits and the Eskimos, the example of the Hopi Indians going to the African side, the Zulu and the Bantu. These people are trackable, and there are other people, their migrations are absolutely not trackable. As far as we know, there's no evidence at all that they ever migrated. So.
God motivated the Spaniards and the French and the English the native people. He wanted to bring Christianity to the heathens of North and South America.
Right, and what Paul is saying, that can be traced, but there are other things that cannot be traced. It doesn't make sense, and all of a sudden, poof, they're there.
And
I have one question, Bill.
yes,
It has to do with the book, or Jasher, you know, because it talks about Abraham when he moved out, you know, and
Right.
whatever, all that, because I was wondering where Jasher started and ended. That's my question, because it's kind of vague, you know.
so we'll be talking about the locations in this chapter. If you're referencing an apocryphal book, I've never read it, and I have no idea whether it's considered one of the more accurate or inaccurate apocryphal books. But in going to this chapter, we will be talking about the place languages shortly. So in God's response, going back to that, he sees the people are united in their pride and their ambition against him. He sees what they're doing. He confounds their language, which basically means, it's a stronger word than even confuses. Confound, when a person's confounded, it's they have no clue. There's no understanding. That's what being confounded means. He split languages so that people had no understanding of others' languages, scattered them abroad so that the city was not finished. The name Babel means confused, and the name Babylon means confusion. I would, if you generally press me, think there's more evidence that Babel and Babylon are the same place and that they're different places, but there's no certainty there either way. I will note that if Babel and Babylon are different, the other great cities of that plain are mentioned as being part of the kingdom of Nimrod, but Babylon is not mentioned if Babel and Babylon are different.
I have a
Yes,
question, you know, like the map with Fertile Crescent
yes,
and all that, Mesopotamia up there, so that's part of what you're saying there, right?
yes. We're talking about southern Mesopotamia as the plain of Shinar.
Okay. So I just want to make sure that was straight.
So, we have once again, verse 9, the city was named Babel because of what the Lord worked on the city. And it says, he confounded the language of all the earth there, and from thence did the Lord scatter them abroad upon the face of all the earth. That is, people and civilizations would now be across the entire earth, the way the Lord had already told Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth to pursue, divide, split up. Another one of the strongest arguments for creation against the idea of societal evolution is the language families are so strongly split up. Like, you have a whole lot of languages that are part of the Indo-European family. For instance, we have some of the same words that came to us through Gaelic that are in Sanskrit. That's Indo-European. Why? The people that were in the Indus Valley in northeastern India, when the Mongolian and barbarian invasions happened, they migrated into Europe, and most of the European mainland cultures north of the Roman Empire that are not Latin came from these people that were in India. So there's a huge connection there. All these languages, there's similarities. They're very different, but there's similarities. What if you go to the Manx family of languages where people click to speak? If you are interested, go to YouTube and search up a click language, and there is no connection at all. There are no recognizable syllables to a person listening from like English or from any other area here. You go east of the Slavic countries to the point where you're heading towards the Mongols and such, and you know the Asiatic languages are very different. They're very tonal. You go to the original American languages, the Native American languages, and you get languages such as the Navajo and Nez Perce, which were so complicated that our army picked up people who spoke these languages and used them to talk over unsecured radio, because the idea is the Japanese will never find out what they're saying. And those languages are not connected with the Eastern Native American languages, the languages of the Iroquois and peoples like that. And you find out there are so many different groups of totally distinct languages. How did they ever come from one? I looked it up last year when teaching. There are 71 distinct language families that we know of that aren't lost, from random island languages to the Polynesians to all the ones I've just mentioned. And as far as we know, the people who are some of the smartest linguists in the world have tried to connect these back because they believe in the theory of evolution and haven't been able to. There's no connection between these 71 language families and possibly even more. It's one of the strongest arguments that this did in fact happen, and God did in fact divide all the languages of the earth. Yes?
I don't know how many people have heard that, what you mentioned about the code talkers during World War II, that they did hire Indian descendants
Yeah, Navajo.
that knew that, I wasn't sure what language that was.
Navajo first in the Pacific Front, and Nez Perce second.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they were communicating and no one could interpret it, so it was never picked up
Yeah.
by the foreign.
Because you can hear what they're saying clearly, but the language is so complicated and so different from either the Asiatic or the European languages. If you got a very educated Japanese person who spoke English also trying to break these, he's going to get nowhere. So, we then have part 5 on the second page. Abraham's cross-out descendants and right ancestors was the one typo I made on this outline. Abraham's ancestors. We're talking about the people that Abraham came from, the genealogies, the rest of this chapter. So what are Abraham's ancestors? First, it's important to note he's from the line of Shem. I'll go ahead and read the genealogy and then we'll continue with this. These are the generations of Shem. Shem was 100 years old and begat Arphaxad 2 years after the flood. And Shem lived after he begat Arphaxad 500 years and begat sons and daughters. And Arphaxad lived 35 years and begot Salah. And Arphaxad lived after he begat Salah 403 years and begat sons and daughters. And Salah lived 30 years and begat Eber. And Salah lived after he begat Eber 403 years and begat sons and daughters. And Eber lived 34 years and begat Peleg. And Eber lived after he begat Peleg 430 years and begat sons and daughters. And Peleg lived 30 years and begat Reu. And Peleg lived after he begat Reu 209 years and begat sons and daughters. And Reu lived 32 years and begat Serug. And Reu lived after he begat Serug 207 years and begat sons and daughters. And Serug lived 30 years and begat Nahor. And Serug lived after he begat Nahor 200 years and begat sons and daughters. And Nahor lived 29 years and begat Terah. And Nahor lived after he begat Terah 119 years and begat sons and daughters. And Terah lived 70 years and begat Abram, Nahor, and Haran. Now these are the generations of Terah. Terah begat Abram, Nahor, and Haran begat Lot. And Haran died before his father Terah in the land of his nativity, in Ur of the Chaldees. And Abram and Nahor took them wives. The name of Abram's wife was Sarai, and the name of Nahor's wife Milcah, the daughter of Haran, the father of Milcah, and the father of Iscah. But Sarai was barren, she had no child. And Terah took Abram his son, and Lot the son of Haran, his son's son, and Sarai his daughter-in-law, and his son's Abram's wife. And they went forth with them from Ur of the Chaldees to go unto the land of Canaan. And they came unto Haran and dwelt there. And the days of Terah were 205 years, and Terah died in Haran. So we have Abram is from the line of Shem, so he's Semitic, being from the line of Shem. He's also descended from Eber, which is where the term now Hebrew comes from, a person who's descended from Eber, although actually the Hebrews are much more narrow. There are lots of other people descended from Eber that are not considered Hebrew. You have Peleg, the person mentioned in the previous chapter. In his days, the earth was divided. The word used for division there means almost certainly we're talking about the Tower of Babel and God dividing languages. He is still several generations, 5 generations before Abram. We have Terah, who's Abram's father, and we have Nahor, who's Abram's brother. Terah will be mentioned several times, and back when wives are sought for Isaac and for Jacob, they'll be taken from the family of Nahor, Abram's brother, a couple lines removed from Abram, because Terah his other two families, besides the family of Lot, are going to stay in the area of Haran. Also, this genealogy is different because it's the first genealogy in the Bible where you don't have "and he died" after every single person. The first two genealogies we've covered, after every single male line, you have this person lived this long and begat sons and daughters and he died, and every one of them is the same. Death is still a part of Adam's sin. It's no longer emphasized. We also see the important part of Abraham's ancestors in verse 31. Terah takes his 3 branches of the family from his 3 sons, and they go, intending to go to Canaan. They get to Haran and stop there. Where's Haran? It's in Syria. It actually surprised me where it is. It's on a tributary of the Euphrates River, not in the main river. It's on a tributary, and it's up in the foothills there. I found out it's been excavated. The buildings they're circular, they look like this with very steeply pointed roofs. They're brick buildings, but they look like those African huts in their shape, but they're brick. And we see, so for some reason, Terah was trying to make it to Canaan. We also know from when Isaac and Jacob go back, or in the case of Isaac, when Abram sends his servant to go back to get a wife for Isaac, that his family here both acknowledged the Lord as well as worshipped idols. That his family seems to be a hybrid family, both worshiping the Lord and picking up some aspects of other religion, some aspects of false religion. And we almost certainly have, the languages have been divided. A lot of people in this area, because of the languages of Aramaic and of Hebrew, both being spoken by several peoples, a lot of these people that they encountered, they could communicate with, but certainly not all of them. What places do we have? We have, Abram is from Ur of the Chaldees, the very southeast of the plain of Shinar, which is in the area that is now the very edge of Iran, on the Persian Gulf. That's where Ur is. Ur was the capital city of the Sumerian Empire, and it's the greatest city that was an ancient city on the Persian Gulf. If you look at the distances, that means Terah took Abram and the rest of his family about 800 miles to get to where Haran was. It's all the way across the entire plain of Shinar, all the way through a bunch of foothills, then up a tributary of the Euphrates River. It's a pretty big journey. We've left the Chaldean Empire. Ur of the Chaldees is because it's part of the Chaldean people, which would be the Elamites, what would later become the Babylonians, the Sumerians, and the Akkadians. He's left all of them, and when you enter Syria, you're entering the Arameans, which is where the name Aramaic comes from. We have Haran, as I mentioned, city up, tributary in what is now Syria. We have the land of Canaan. Not all of Canaan's descendants settled there, but most of them did. They become known as the Canaanites. That's the land we're talking about now, which is Israel. And with that, we are getting close to the end of time. I will leave the last 2 sections for next week, or next week that we have Sunday school, depending on whether things change for Christmas. But any questions before we close in prayer?
I seen where it's not recently, but there was like 1 or 2 cultures where they didn't have a language at all. And that's what I was wondering if you ever
So,
come across that.
I've never heard of cultures without a spoken language. Many, many cultures do not have a written language. But people, God's designed us for relationship and communication with Him first of all, but also with others. I could not imagine that without a spoken language. Now, I have heard of certain people where a family has lived or moved by themselves, something for refuge and such, and when the children of the family are reintroduced into civilization, they cannot speak. I have heard of that case where a very small group of people are split off. But otherwise, I've never heard of anything like it. Let's close in prayer. Dear Lord God, I thank you for this chapter and its testimony of your sovereignty. We thank you for how you've accomplished your purposes, and talking and knowing the development of Genesis later, that you will bless all the nations of the world in Abraham's seed through Jesus Christ. We thank you that through creating nations, you have still fulfilled your purposes, shown your wisdom and your grace. We pray that you'd bless the rest of this morning. In Jesus' name, amen.